Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Philip McKenzie, and we are here to discuss what can only be called too many fights. On this episode of Heavy Hands, let's see, we will be looking forward to a weekend which has two cards happening. Curiously, none of them on Saturday. Is something else happening this Saturday? I don't know. But we have the Ultimate Fighter, let's see, what are we up to now? 28 finale. Phil, you've been following this season of The Ultimate Fighter, haven't you?
Oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how Jack Smith does. Is there a fighter on this called Jack Smith? It seemed like an MMA fighter name that might be there.
I really did not know if you were making that up or not, which is a good sign. You know, that's a sign of a healthy franchise. But the main event of that card, pretty damn interesting. Welterweight contenders, Rafael dos Anjos, former lightweight champion, of course, and Kamaru Usman will be fighting. We've also got a bantamweight banger that we are going to talk about in today's episode, Pedro Munhoz versus Brian Caraway. Two fighters I basically consider must-watch in a division that is full of must-watch fighters, but both guys always entertaining. And then we're also going to look forward to the card that's happening on Sunday, and that is an Adelaide card, my goodness, and the main event of that one, Junior Dos Santos versus Tuivasa. The UFC, perhaps once again showing off their glittering ability to carefully build and develop their rising talents. Not that we are exactly sure what's going to happen in that one, but we'll see. And we're also going to talk about from that card another welterweight matchup, Jake Matthews, Australia's hottest prospect, versus Tony Martin, Connor Rebush's hottest prospect. And that should be a very interesting fight as well. And then we're also going to look back at what happened last weekend at UFC Beijing, which was certainly not a bad card to watch, but certainly also benefited from the ability to skip through all of the things that weren't interesting while watching it. But there were definitely some highlights, some very competitive and well-matched fights, and some big surprises, and dramatic endings as well. So we're going to get into that, and of course we'll mention the main event where, you know, Francis Ngannou revealed that he is still in fact Francis Ngannou, and that Curtis Blades' chin is in fact human. So we're going to get into all of that, and just so you know, I'll say at the top of the show, we are going to be trying our best later this week to record a bonus episode to preview at least one or two other of the fights from these undercards. Like, for example, Joe Benavidez, Alex Perez. I'm interested. And there are a couple other ones that are worth talking about as well. So we'll try to get to those later this week. Don't be disappointed because there's just, as I said, too many fights happening. So, Phil, shall we jump in with RDA and Kamaru Usman? It's an interesting matchup, isn't it? It's, on the one hand, feels like it should be easy to pick. And this is the scary part. The more you think about it, the more you overthink, perhaps, the harder it becomes to pick it. But isn't that often the case when you are picking RDA against a wrestler?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there, because it does feel like one of those fights where both, and this is true of both RDA and Damian Maia, is that if you look back on their losses, they've had commonalities to them. And eventually, you just kind of start picking the commonality. And in this case, it is big, powerful wrestlers where RDA cannot stop himself from going into the clinch. Mm-hmm. And so on that note, it does seem like you might as well just pick it. Like, you might as well just pick Usman. RDA, you know, lost to Colby Covington, who's by a lot of people's metrics considered to be a lesser prospect than Usman. Mm-hmm. He's perhaps on the downside of his career because he's been fighting for so long. And then you kind of look at that fight and you think, how much is Colby Covington like Kamaru Usman?
Right.
How much is Kamaru Usman even like, say, Evan Dunham?
Right.
How much is he like any of these guys that RDA has lost to?
Yeah, or as a wrestler, is he like weirdly more comparable to someone like Ben Henderson? Is that possible? It does have this impression that Covington's a lesser contender, and not to just dip into the obvious easy MMA math, but I'm not sure I would pick Usman over Covington.
Right.
At all. In fact, I think I can it seems like the right choice to me now to pick Covington in a matchup like that. They're clearly very different styles. So let's get into the nitty gritty of those styles. Like, again, the problem is, I mean, last time I ended up picking RDA over Covington. Like, well, here are the little differences between Covington and other wrestlers that RDA has faced that explain why RDA may have just enough leeway to win this style matchup this time. As it turns out, it was still poisonous. So, like, I don't want to go through the whole process of talking myself into it, but there is something.
I mean, let's say we have to remember it was also a very close fight, which a lot of people thought RDA had an argument for winning.
Yeah, I'm not with those people necessarily, but yeah. I mean, he certainly had his moments.
I thought Covington won a relatively clear 3-2, but
yeah,
you know.
But he certainly had his moments, as he always does. I mean, everyone except Khabib, he has had his moments against. And he even had a couple against Khabib. But the problem is that RDA is not generally a one-shot kill artist. Maybe he could be against Usman. I don't know. It might be the worst chin that he's been able to test in a while. We'll see. But yeah, what are the differences between Usman and a guy like Covington? Because it does seem to me a key ingredient is not just the wrestlers, but the pressure wrestlers. RDA doesn't like being pressured. He likes to do the pressuring. And sometimes, unfortunately, the opponent has to sort of invite him to do that because he is technical enough everywhere else and thoughtful enough as a fighter that he can sort of trick himself into fighting the wrong kind of fight. But does Usman have a pressure wrestling style like Covington, like Khabib, like who else were there? Clay Guida? Who were the other ones who beat RDA?
T-Bow.
Like T-Bow.
T-Bow is the interesting one, right? Because in many ways, and this is a fight which is very, pretty far removed from the present day, but he's probably the closest analog to Usman, right?
I would agree.
In terms of being a huge pot-shotting southpaw.
Yep.
So the question is kind of, if Usman isn't a natural pressure fighter, then can he make himself a natural pressure fighter? You know, can he do it? Because I think one of the things you can notice about, you kind of notice about Usman he's a rope fighter. He's well schooled. He's reminiscent of, in terms of the kind of sort of sheer physical power combined with somewhat rote technique. He's most reminiscent of Kevin Lee down at lightweight in that way.
Also reminds me of Gilbert Burns.
Yeah. That's probably even a stronger.
He's clearly got the power and he's clearly been taught the right moves, but there's a sense of feel lacking. Yeah.
So I think the question is, can he make himself a pressure fighter? And I think I'm going to say that I think he probably can. And I think the fight which spoke to this the best was his matchup against Sean Strickland. And I think that what we've kind of seen from Usman is some of his performances haven't been the prettiest, and they've been sort of conservative in their own way, but in the broad strategic brushes, he hasn't really made any mistakes in terms of who he's fought.
Yeah.
Right? If we think of, his fight against Damian Maia was tremendously boring, but he also didn't give Maia any opportunity to win it whatsoever.
Right.
Fight against Strickland, he pretty much had Strickland backed into the fence instantaneously, exactly where he needed him. And it's not like Strickland is tremendously hard to put there, but he also didn't let Strickland off the hook at all. So, I mean, I think the question has to be, I don't think, even given these kind of caveats, that Usman is as good a pressure fighter as Covington. He's just not as relentless. He doesn't have things like Covington's kicking game, which did a lot of heavy lifting in that RDA fight. Like, a lot of heavy lifting. Because RDA was constantly thinking about, like, one of the first strikes Covington hit him with was just a head kick. Because he's just got a very kind of snappy, quick kicking game.
Yeah.
And Covington and RDA was constantly thinking, he was constantly thinking kick, punch, level change, kick, punch, level change. And he just couldn't sit down on more than one shot at any one time because he wasn't sure what was coming back at him. Usman doesn't have any of that. What Usman does have is just sheer physical fucking power of a level which I suspect Covington just doesn't. Covington is not a large welterweight, and Usman is a very large and freakishly powerful welterweight. So, I mean, for me, in the end, it does kind of come down to that age-old question, which is, does RDA really have any way of avoiding the clinch when he doesn't want it?
Mm-hmm.
Because he still just, his two primary ways of getting are just, his primary options are just fight the other guy in the clinch, which he's gotten increasingly good at, fire back, or just move straight backwards.
Mm-hmm.
He's still never really gotten the hang of, like, pivoting off, stiff arming out. Like, he's never really figured out how not to just engage when someone wants him in the clinch.
Or accepting a clinch in such a way, like on his own terms, in such a way that he has an easy escape. It would also be an option to cut the pressuring opponent off by crashing into the clinch with a good underhook, immediately turning and framing out, but he doesn't do that. He usually gets tied up when people are pressuring him with his back to the fence. There are the problems in Usman's game. Like, I don't know. One thing that particularly stands out, a couple things particularly stand out, but one is, like, the man does not throw combinations. He really, really has to gear up to throw more than one shot at a time. Which wouldn't be the worst problem in the world. Like, you can definitely have a style built around pot shotting. But he's also, despite what is obviously a great deal of speed and power, he's also very predictable because of that lack of feel. Like, there's that one sequence I mentioned to you earlier from the fight with Emil Weber-Mech, where Usman eats a big body kick. He sort of partially blocks it and grabs onto Mech's ankle, in sort of a weird, like, one of those weird backwards grips, a little monkey's paw kind of grip. And then he, like, sights Mech, who's off balance and starting to turn around, and he's like, all right, I'm going to hit him while I've got his ankle. So then he kind of steps forward, still holding the leg, and he sort of loads up, and he sort of loads up some more. And then he supercharges into this big left hook, and before it even connects, Mech cracks him in the fucking chin with a spinning back fist off the kick. And he has like a whole 2 seconds, it feels like anyway. It feels like so much time elapsing between Usman realizing there's an opportunity to counter and working up the sense of comfort to let the counter go. I already compared it to someone like trying to kick a field goal or a penalty kick and having to take like a bunch of little tippy toe steps because they just don't know their distance. They don't know how to time their approach to the ball in order to kick it really nice, cleanly, and smoothly. And that's how Usman's striking feels a lot of the time. Like he's got to really like think through and like convince himself to throw. And then he doesn't always like move naturally and fluidly after he throws either. He's often an open target afterwards. But the thing is like, is that enough? Like, if RDA can't knock him out, which is not something he typically does to people unless, and the larger question, as you said, Usman generally makes good strategic decisions in his fights. He usually seems to come well prepared for the specific opponent he's fighting. So like, with all these tactical issues, as long as he's being aggressive and coming forward and doesn't get killed, is RDA going to be able to avoid the same kind of fight he's been losing his whole career? And I feel like I too have to pick Usman because I don't really trust RDA to find a way to win a matchup against an aggressive wrestler anymore. I have to see it before I could go forward believing him capable of that.
Yeah, I remember that spinning back fist against Mech, but I've actually just had Usman Strickland running in the background, and to that note, at around like 4 minutes 36 to go in the third round, he has one of the most puzzling striking exchanges I've literally ever seen. In that they sort of do a little kind of patty cake range finding with each other, and then they're both kind of just facing each other in. So Usman's standing orthodox at this point, and he just kind of steps in, and I have to stress, like, Strickland is not moving at this point.
He does
Usman
a lot of
steps in as though he is throwing a punch at Strickland, as though Strickland was standing 3 feet to the left.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it is one of the most baffling things I've ever seen.
It is.
And Strickland just punches him in the side of his head as he goes past.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally like, it's not. It's one of the. It's incredibly bizarre.
Usman is one of the starkest examples of like the grappler or wrestler who needs to be in contact with his opponent to have any idea what's going on. Like the difference in feel it's a comfort thing. It's got to be. Where like he's just overthinking, he's tense when he's striking, and you can see those things come through. But like the contrast between his attitude, his body language, and just how adept he is at what he's trying to do when he's got a hold of someone and is wrestling them, compared to when he's striking, is really, really stark. Because man, he looks like a fucking world beater when he's wrestling people. He's so smooth and flowy and so strong. And just doesn't have to think twice about anything. Doesn't have to think about anything half the time. Just does it. And striking is a completely different world. So, yeah, like I said, there are things that give me pause about Usman as a contender in general, and against someone who could potentially put some pressure on him, and attack him with a really like layered combination attack. And I think that could be a problem, but
Seriously, find that exchange if you can in the Usman Strickland fight. It's like 9 minutes 13. Like, whilst we're talking about other stuff, try and find that exchange in that fight. It is absolutely one of the most baffling things I've ever seen in this sport.
I will definitely pull it up. Okay, why don't we talk about the co-main event here while we've got a couple minutes left in segment 1. As I said before, co-main event of UFC Ultimate Fighter something. Heavy hitters, that's what they're calling this one. Cool. It's a bantamweight matchup between Pedro Munhoz and Brian Caraway. And I don't honestly know how you could not be excited for this matchup, because, like you're a human being, listener, so you hate Brian Caraway. But you have to also acknowledge he's generally in good fights, and you're a human being, so you love watching Pedro Munhoz fight, don't you? I mean, what's wrong with you if you don't? It's always incredibly fun. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this as a matchup generally? We'll just cover this one pretty briefly, I think.
Yeah, it's a great fight. I mean, I've developed a lot of respect for Brian Caraway. I mean, he's clearly done some pretty douchey things in the past, but he seems like the kind of insecure, weird guy to which I always have a little bit of sympathy. And he's consistently taken on really tough fights, like, up and comers, Aljamain Sterling, Cody Stamann, stuff like that. And this seems like a nightmare style matchup for him. Like, how does he beat Pedro Munhoz? Is he going to outbox him on the feet? I don't think he is. I think he's going to get his leg. He's going to get his leg kicked off. Is he going to take him down and outgrapple him? That seems like it would be dangerous.
Yeah.
This is the matchup of Caraway against Stamann was a really interesting one, in that it was, two three-dimensional guys testing their game against each other. I'm going to wrestle when you think I'm going to strike. I'm going to strike when you think I'm going to wrestle. And that kind of, and Stamann just kind of managed to edge it mostly on just physicality. But as we saw when Stamann fought Aljamain Sterling, what happens when you fight someone who's just so overwhelming in one of those areas that you just can't go there? Right.
Yeah, it's like Usman against Maya. Like, how much does your style look like shit when you just feel you can't contend with someone in one specific area?
Yeah. And also, there was the fact that Stamann sort of probably wasn't, without his wrestling, wasn't a better range striker than Sterling either, really. And that's kind of the problem here. Like, Caraway doesn't have the power, he doesn't have the diversity, and if he can out-wrestle and out-grapple Pedro Munhoz, that would be amazing. I would be incredibly impressed.
Yeah, but Munhoz doesn't have, as a grappler and wrestler, the the specific problems that Aljo had that allowed Caraway to really test him. And one thing is certain: Brian Caraway is going to look like he's outboxing Pedro Munhoz for at least a minute or two. That seems likely.
Yes.
Munhoz is going to come in, not moving his head, with a very high guard that has a very large gap in the middle, right where his nose and chin are, and he's going to get hit in the face by jabs. Caraway does have a good jab. So he's going to walk into that for a while, and then Caraway's going to start getting his leg carved up. And yeah, one of the underrated things about Munhoz too is his own wrestling game. Both as a defensive and offensive wrestler, he's pretty damn underrated.
Yeah, he rarely gives up a takedown unless he knows he's going into a guillotine.
Yes, unless he's already got the guillotine. And he locks that shit on so fast. It's so hard for me to watch. Oh my God. I just realized watching this footage, Cody Stamann has a fucking Molon Labe tattoo on his pec.
Oh, Christ.
In the fucking Greek letters and everything. What a dork. But yes, like watching this fight, there's so many times where Caraway's like, I'm going to dive really hard on a takedown. And his wrestling does often succeed just because he puts so much pressure on his opponents and is just willing to go for the shot and work for, completing it in layers 3 and 4. And that first ugly layer, there are a lot of vulnerabilities there for a counter submission artist as dangerous as Munhoz. Like his neck is right there a lot of the time. So yeah, it's a fun fight. Caraway always makes it a scrap. And Munhoz cannot help but have a scrap because he's hittable and aggressive and doesn't know any other way. But also, I don't think Caraway can survive a firefight / grapple fest with him for very long. So
give us Munhoz Lineker, goddammit.
Yeah, why the fuck aren't we getting that? Where is John Lineker? What happened to him? Did I finally wish him out of existence after all these years of trying? I didn't mean to. I regret it now. Should I sing that?
Denied us Munhoz Lineker.
Should I sing that "When You Pave a Parking Lot" song to express my grief? I didn't know what I had till it was gone. Okay. Well, we're both thinking Pedro Munhoz. I think that makes sense. Still definitely a fight worth watching. And when we come back, we're going to get into Sunday's card. Again, that's main evented by Junior Dos Santos and Tai Tuivasa. And we're also going to look at another welterweight matchup on that one, Jake Matthews, Tony Martin. And after that, back to UFC Beijing after this break. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about UFC Adelaide something Dos Santos versus Tuivasa. Somehow, Phil, after all this time, I've not figured out what the naming convention for these fight cards actually is. Once again, I'm going to commit to using the fighters' names rather than whatever the promotion chooses. So let's call this UFC Fight Night, Junior Dos Santos versus Tai Tuivasa, and that is the main event, the fight we're going to discuss first. They're trying to build Tai Tuivasa into a contender. They're trying to sacrifice Junior Dos Santos. Maybe the intentions aren't quite that clear. But, they gotta have heavyweights in the main event of these fight night cards, Phil. As you pointed out to me before, that's a trend that we are all very excited about because we know heavyweight MMA is always the best MMA. And certainly, Jake Matthews versus Tony Martin wouldn't be a better fight. But anyway, do you think things will line up that way? I'm sure many people are expecting this to be a changing of the guard type moment for Tuivasa. Do you think it's going to shake out that way? And why?
I don't.
I think
yeah, and that's basically it. I would. So one of the things is Junior Dos Santos is very good at very specific things.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the things which tricked us all when he was on the way up, because he looked like he was very good at lots of things because we never really got to see any of the fundamental flaws in his game exposed.
Yep.
Which were that they were sort of similar to those to Anthony Pettis's, that he's empty of offense in the clinch, he's got terrible footwork, and that he escapes. His method of escaping from the cage, if he's backed up into it, is to river dance off it.
Just to not.
Yeah. But like that's the only way he ever like gets out of there.
Yeah.
Is that he keeps his body and head bolt upright and will simply move his legs.
I'm just imagining JDS doing like the MC Hammer dance along the perimeter of the octagon.
I mean,
no guard.
Maybe that would be more effective than river dancing.
At least MC Hammer squats down a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would probably be better.
And the MC Hammer dance does I also involve head movement.
Oh, true.
And
yeah.
If he could evade a strike whilst doing that and then come back with a counter, he would instantly go into the MMA Halls of Fame.
I think Junior should really invest in walking like an Egyptian. I think that's the next revolution in his game that's really going to help him get off the fence. Yeah. So we know JDS's problems well at this point. And lately it does feel like he, I don't know. I mean, they were only exposed relatively recently, given all of the rise that he experienced coming up through the ranks. But, like that being said, they seem to have been very dramatically emphasized recently, because he's not just been like getting into hard fights as a result of his problems. He's been getting knocked the fuck out. Yeah.
I mean, the Overeem fight was the really damning one for me, because that was when we realized that not only can he not fight moving backwards, but he can't really fight moving forwards either.
Yeah.
He relies on people basically standing in front of him and conceding a mid-range boxing match with him.
Yep. Or following him around very loosely.
Yeah. So Tuivasa is someone who's going to stand in front of Junior Dos Santos and concede a mid-range boxing match to him.
Yeah. Go on, please. No, I don't know. I don't know yet. I want to hear your thoughts on it. I'm not sure. I don't know how I feel about this one. But some of my concern has to do with where I feel like JDS is at right now. But, that was my fucking concern with Ngannou last weekend, and we'll get to that. So, sometimes you just have to take into account what the style matchup is like and have that be the defining characteristic.
It was also the concern with where JDS was at before the Rothwell fight.
Yeah.
Which was, Rothwell looking like he's in the shape of his life coming into that fight.
Yep.
Rothwell having beaten a bunch of people who aren't particularly good. And, and then feeling like, is the power and the countering just going to be too much for a kind of faded JDS? And then JDS just kind of beat the shit out of him.
Yeah.
In this case, do I trust... What has Tuivasa shown that says to me that he can get past JDS just standing at mid-range and just flicking out jab to the head, jab to the body, huge, ugly overhand?
Yeah. That he's not just going to be a shorter-armed, possibly somewhat slower-footed JDS?
Yeah. I mean, with just much less of a functional jab.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, JDS's jab in a vacuum is still amazing. Is still a great punch.
Yeah.
If you are just standing in front of him, you're going to have a terrible time. You're not going to be sure what's going to be coming at you. And yeah, I'm just not sure that he has the necessary tool set. I mean, JDS's durability is always an issue. I think that Tuivasa is obviously incredibly strong. He's weirdly quick, much like his sort of
mentor.
Mark Hunt. And
I saved you from saying protege there. It's because I went through that same process in my own head.
I was going to say progenitor, but I was like, is that
all right.
word?
That kind of makes sense, yeah. His paterfamilias, Mark Hunt. Let's get real.
Then that would have made me sound like a wanker. So let's be thankful that I didn't. But yeah, so and that's basically it. Like, I feel like it might actually end up looking quite a bit like Hunt JDS, and I think that Tuivasa can probably he'll probably do some work in close. JDS in close, his defense has often left him vulnerable, especially to like combination punching. But yeah, I just think that Tuivasa is going to find himself like shocked by the amount of damage he has to take to close distance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at some footage of Tuivasa fighting Arlovsky, and it's like, right? Yeah, you're probably dead on. Like, I don't know. I have more faith in a guy like Tuivasa than I do in someone like Blagoy Ivanov, largely because he's 25 years old, and has already had some learning experiences. I do think it's possible, like, he comes in here having really learned something from that Arlovsky fight. He may have won it, but Jesus, it was not an easy win. He had to wear a lot of damage getting in there, and a lot of the exchanges were very even. Generally, he had to take at least one punch to deliver one or two.
Yeah. And Arlovsky is not exactly a master of distance control in terms of, right, keeping people out.
Right. Yeah, he just sort of agreed to fight at that range. And that's the thing, is like, if you're going to agree to fight at range with Arlovsky, yes, you may close the distance with good combinations at some point. And that is a concern, because JDS's defense is not good. And, like, he is in so many ways a shorter heavyweight Alexander Gustafsson. His defense is bad. And even Blagoy Ivanov was landing counters and such on him. I am concerned about Tuivasa's ability to come forward with combinations. He's got a really quick, mean left hook. He, at a certain point, too, when he became frustrated with what was happening in the Arlovsky fight, he just started to pour on the volume. And that in and of itself may be enough that if JDS's chin isn't quite up to snuff or whatever, he gets hurt and the fight changes dramatically in an instant. But also, if you're going to agree mostly to fight Arlovsky at a range at which he's not keeping you, you're just like trying to pick your spots and pace yourself from that range, even if you come into this fight with JDS much more prepared to come forward, JDS does enforce the distance, right? So, like,
yep.
How quickly is he going to change your mind for this wholly new strategic idea you've adopted when he just starts hitting you in the gut and the face with a jab dozens and dozens of times in the first 5 minutes? And still one of JDS's greatest qualities, and what still makes him, I think, a somewhat reliable main event fighter, is he's got great conditioning. He's always in extremely good shape and can just keep pumping out that jab and the long kicks and setting up the occasional overhand or uppercut now and then and just breaking you down for 5 rounds. So, yeah, Tuivasa feels more dangerous than Ivanov, but also, like, stylistically, that was why when I looked at the Ivanov fight, I was like, this is I've seen JDS win this fight before. So, yeah, it is hard looking at it more not to kind of feel that way about this one. All right. Well, turnover is a lie. Okay. Don't expect new things at heavyweight. Nothing ever changes. And, Junior Dos Santos will be looking really sad and uncomfortable in really horrible, brutal fights for at least 3 decades to come. So we have that to look forward to. But until then, there was one other fight from this card I really wanted to talk about. Jake Matthews and Tony Martin. Listeners will know that I am Tony Martin's boyfriend. And I just love him to death. But no, genuinely, I think this is a really exciting matchup. It's a fight between a fighter in Jake Matthews, who I think has sort of, sometimes it's hard to put your finger on what corner he's turned. We'll talk about that. But who seems to have kind of realized himself as a fighter recently. And Tony Martin, who I think has had a similar revelation, but is still in the process of like, bringing that realization about, fully developing the style that he has now chosen to fight in. What do you think of it, man?
2 very, very big lightweights have now thankfully found themselves up at welterweight.
Yes, we should be thankful for that.
Yeah, what the fuck happened with Jake Matthews? I mean, he just seems to be getting bigger every time.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming that like people in the audience are just going to see like little concentric ripples coming out of their beer by the time he actually starts coming out at Adelaide. He just as he just grows bigger and bigger every time he steps into the cage.
3 times the size of Yoel Romero. What's that?
he's just an enormous welterweight now.
Yeah. No, I think I think I've said this before on the show, but I wouldn't even say I won't be surprised. I'm expecting that someday, not too far in the future, Matthews will be a middleweight.
Right.
He's huge. Yeah, he's massive. And like clearly, I don't know, went through some sort of late growth spurt or something, but he has, fighters grow into their frames as they get older. It's important to remember that Matthews is still just, how old is he? 24.
Wow.
And is clearly like a very hard-working, dedicated fighter and has just been packing on mass. I think that probably by the time he's 30, and very likely sooner than that, he'll be a middleweight because he's massive.
Yep. So, and both of these guys have had serious, obviously they've had obvious talent from their early UFC careers, and they've had serious growing pains in part because, like, UFC lightweight is a fucking horrific division to grow up in, and you're going to be fighting guys like Kevin Lee and Rashid Magomedov in your developmental phase. But yeah, so we have like Jake Matthews, who sort of developed this real sort of blitzing style. He was originally just pretty much a kind of violent top position grappler, but he's kind of become like a high paced Tyron Woodley, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Real like blast double, mixing up between overhand and left hook, just kind of distance closing, blitz fighter.
Yeah, it's not
and
as
meanwhile.
Go on.
Yeah, and meanwhile, what's his name?
Tony Martin.
Tony Martin has become just a much more technical, much more what you'd consider to be a traditional technical fighter, working behind a jab, becoming much more of a striker and much less of a grappler, because he was really just a full-on power grappler, Kimura sub, gas out, die kind of guy
not just
when he first came up.
And not just a striker, but like a very specialized counterpuncher.
Yeah.
It's kind of a strange turn that I did not see coming, but ever since, man, I still watch this fight fairly frequently. But ever since that fight, yes, that Johnny Case fight was so good. What's funny about that, huh? What's funny, you son of a bitch?
You love your struggling underdogs, Connor.
I like to watch fighters develop, and that was a real. Yeah. I mean, there's no denying it was a real corner turn of a fight for Tony Martin, where suddenly it's like, oh shit, he is like dinging Johnny Case with huge counter shots, and was clearly really getting more and more comfortable with the exchanges as the fight went on. It was like that was the moment, if you had to pick one that was actually not in the gym and aired to the public, where Tony Martin sort of realized that he wanted to be a heavy-handed counterpuncher. And then, knocking Ryan LaFleur the fuck out is a pretty good step in that direction, I would say. One of the major things, though, with Martin's development, and why I peg him as a fighter who's still in the process of developing his style, is that, like, I mean, let's be honest, counterpunching is a hard style to develop, to grow into. It's a very fine line you have to walk between patient and hesitant. And it does take Martin a while sometimes in his recent fights to build up to the point where he has his opponent's timing. And he is not a fantastic defensive fighter either. So he does tend to like have to accrue damage until he eventually gets to the point where he's like, okay, it works to his favor sometimes, because the opponent's like, well, I'm going to kick him in the leg in the same place I've been kicking him. And at that point, Martin's got the counter right hand lined up. So they really commit to the leg kick, and he cracks him really, really hard. But Matthews has that tricky, like that tricky style for a young, still developing counterpuncher where, like he can blitz you, but he doesn't give you a lot of free information. A lot of it is like big single charges that seem to come out of nowhere. Like I remember we talked to Dominic Cruz on the show once. Oh man, the show used to be so famous. We had so many stars coming through the doors at Heavy Hands, here at the Heavy Hands offices. Now even the receptionist is gone. But, no, Dominic Cruz talked about fighting Uriah Faber and how it was like an interesting challenge because like he would throw pot shots and he was really fast and powerful. And like, so it could be difficult to time him because he didn't give you a lot of looks for free. And Matthews has some of that. Like Matthews, I'm also reminded of like, when Kyle Bochniak fought Zabit or when he fought, Brandon Davis. And it's like, oh, like being athletic and quick and willing to like leap in with these really aggressive flurries of strikes and or takedowns, like that's a style that still works in MMA. You can still force your opponent to play that guessing game unsuccessfully if you have that kind of athleticism in your back pocket and you're confident in using it. So, like, how much time can Tony Martin afford to let expire while Matthews is setting him up for takedowns and dinging him with really hard right hands?
Yeah, I mean, so the other interesting thing is, and Ryan LaFleur is not a bad analog for Jake Matthews' style. He is also a range blitzer, right? He is also a level change guy, and Martin dealt with him pretty easily. And I think one of the advantages that these two guys have had is the one that we discussed in the weight cutting episode, is that they are just faster than a lot of welterweights. Mm-hmm. And they have been fighting faster people throughout their careers. And so, you know, Li Jingliang is a pretty slow welterweight, and he looked like he was stuck in the mud against Jake Matthews for much of their fight.
How dare you? He wasn't stuck in the mud. He was stuck in Jake Matthews' eye socket.
He was. Like that. One of the more impressive like eye gouges we've seen in the sport. We still love you, Leach. We probably shouldn't after that.
Still love him. Don't give a fuck. Yeah.
And you know, and similarly, Ryan LaFleur has always made his bones as just a very, very quick welterweight. And it wasn't like he'd been, you know, Ryan LaFleur had still been doing well against, you know, solid welterweights before he fought Tony Martin. It wasn't like he was on some horrific slide. Mm-mm. So the question is, has Tony Martin turned a technical corner where even someone like Jake Matthews just can't close distance on him without getting hit?
Yeah, I mean...
Jake Matthews is not a good defensive fighter.
No, not at all. It's all about making you react to what he's doing, and it's all about his initiative. But like the thing is that I see where you're coming from with the parallel to LaFleur, but also like you got to turn a lot of the Jake Matthews sliders down, I think.
Yeah.
In terms of like how you can afford to let that early time elapse. You can afford to let LaFleur land these pitter-patter leg kicks and whatnot, because they are fairly pitter-patter. There's not a whole lot of threat behind anything he does. And that even includes the shots. Like, there's considerably less threat there because he's not as overwhelmingly strong and aggressive. And he's just not a great finisher. Even on the ground, he goes for a lot of submissions. But Tony Martin can deal with someone who goes for a lot of submissions. He can deal with someone... I would
say, like, Ryan LaFleur has historically been a much more effective and technical wrestler than Jake Matthews had.
Oh, yeah.
This was really one of the things which Matthews struggled with as, you know, when he was coming up. Yeah. And this might be something that he's changed, in that he's a good, like, experienced submission grappler, but he would blow lots of energy going on takedowns, which wouldn't necessarily work. Yeah, he struggled immensely with who was it that who's Zane's favorite fighter? Bosnian Steel.
Oh, Damir Hadžović.
Steel even.
Damir Hadžović?
No.
Who's Serbian? Veličković.
Yeah, Bojan Veličković.
Bojan Veličković, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, people from the Balkans. You have too many little countries. Please forgive me.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably my fault for saying Bosnian first.
Yeah, Adele Burkic is going to be so fucking mad at you. You really shit the bed. I'm so
sorry, Adele.
You really shit the bed.
Yeah. Yeah, like, that's the thing. Being able to hit blast doubles on Li Jingliang, is that impressive? I'm not really sure.
Right. Yeah, and as you said, like, it is a fair point. Martin is similarly fucking huge, and very physically strong himself, and is also like not that old, and as I think still growing into himself. And the other thing too is like, despite what do seem to be some growing pains still in his developing game, Martin does look super confident. That was the thing that stood out in the case fight as well. Like suddenly Martin,
he's a Lionheart. That's who's he's a good Lionheart.
Yeah,
I think.
But he's kind of one who's like figuring it out, you know?
Yeah.
He's really weaponizing it effectively. He doesn't have to he only has to.
We were talking about who were good Lionhearts last week. I think he's definitely one, and that's why you like him.
Yeah, maybe that's it. But he's got, ever since that case fight, he has had just swagger. You know, like I don't know. Maybe he's not going to be cowed by what Matthews has to offer him, and maybe Matthews is still technically so sort of basic, unrefined that Martin can start timing him. But I'm worried about those early minutes and what that early seizure of initiative might mean.
And also that a big, powerful, young, grappling-based lightweight just dominated Tony Martin.
Yeah.
After the case fight.
Yeah. I do think it like a significantly more nuanced...
Olivier Aubin-Mercier.
Yeah. In some ways, a significantly more nuanced grappler. But...
yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to take Matthews. I'm going to take Matthews. I don't like it.
Yeah. That's the thing. I was really easily going to pick Matthews before I watched footage.
Yeah.
And then I kind of felt like I wanted to pick Martin.
You should do it, man.
I'm going to pick Martin just because it would be good. I can hold it over you.
Yes.
I like Tony Martin. I believe in Tony Martin more than you do in case he wins. And that's the only reason I'm going to do it.
All right. Perfect rationale. I'm looking forward to being shamed because I already feel guilty about picking against him because, again, he is my boyfriend and I love him so much. After this next break, we are going to talk about UFC Beijing. Again, Ngannou knocked Blades the hell out. But also other things happened. Pretty much the whole main card had little moments that were worth discussing. Our beloved Song Yadong had a fun and very impressive performance against Vince Morales. And also sort of revealed some problems in his game. And yeah, there were a lot of other interesting things as well, most of them being Kevin Holland. And then in segment 4, we're going to spend 3 hours discussing Chuck versus Tito 3. Just kidding, we'll be back after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Blades versus Ngannou. That was the main event. And Phil, I don't want to be a revisionist, but I feel I can still believe that this was intentionally cruel, punitive matchmaking from the UFC, while also recognizing that, now knowing what happened, Ngannou knocking Blades out in 30 seconds, it was also dumber in more ways than I realized at the time. Because now you have Ngannou set up as a title contender again, which we're all hyped to see that again. I want to see Ngannou out wrestle Daniel Cormier, or whatever. It happens to be there when he gets to it. But also, you have knocked Curtis Blades, one of your few rising stars in the still very anemic heavyweight division, right back down the rankings. And possibly, I don't know. You never know how you set somebody back when you hand him a loss like this. Blades seems like he's handling it well, but we didn't learn anything, did we? And it feels dumb that it happened.
they're just clearing the road for Tai Tuivasa's eventual ascension to the title run once he beats Junior Dos Santos.
Yep, put all your eggs in that basket, folks.
Yeah. No, we didn't learn much. I guess it was good to see that Ngannou took his opportunities very early in this fight. In that he clearly came out telling himself he'd said before the Lewis fight, which was a huge red flag to me, I'm going to use my patience and go back to my counterpunching, which made me think this fight's going to suck balls, which it did. In this one, he'd clearly come out, telling himself many, many times, don't fight like that, bite on opportunities. So it was good to see him coming out and immediately, I think the first strike he threw was like a leg kick.
Yep.
I think what helped him out the most was that he came forward and that he didn't concede space. So Blades has obviously improved, and we touched on it in his kind of pressuring footwork and his ability to throw kind of throwaway jabs. But the fact that Ngannou was in his face almost immediately meant that Blades resorted to his natural tendency to just fight. He just threw a big punch, and Ngannou countered it immediately, and that was pretty much the end of the fight. Yep. It was a good stoppage, and we learned that Ngannou is better when he fights a bit more aggressively and draws shots out of the opponent, but we don't actually know whether he can draw shots out of them with anything more than the image of aggression.
Yes. Yeah, with just sort of the pressure of presence, of proximity.
Yeah.
And is it even really that new? Because, like, that's kind of how Ngannou fought Overeem, isn't it?
Yep.
You know, like, he came forward, he was aggressively looking to counter.
Yeah, I still felt like that after the Overeem fight. I was just like, what if Overeem had just run away and just thrown oblique kicks and a sporadic punch every now and again, instead of thinking, oh my god, this guy's terrifying. But yeah, so Ngannou has reverted to a earlier, still dangerous, earlier, more dangerous, but still probably quite limited version of himself, and that's all we can say.
Yep. Yeah,
it's still a slightly tricky style matchup for Curtis Blades.
Yeah, and I think you did a good job acknowledging that last week. That just fundamentally, the counterpuncher is the very patient counterpuncher is a tough one to deal with for the innately more aggressive wrestle boxer. Also, that dipshit Zane Simon also did a very good job of worrying about this matchup. At the very least, we know Ngannou's not such a head case that, he's gonna react. He can also react positively to bad performances and not just completely shut himself away inside his own head and do nothing. So
yeah, long term, this is probably a better result because it means like, hey, Ngannou is still a going concern in the heavyweight division. Yeah, because I suspect it really might have broken him.
Yeah. If he had lost it, it really may have. So okay, yeah, it happened. It took 45 seconds. Moving on, Alistair Overeem greeted Sergey Pavlovich into the heavyweight division of the UFC. And I already said this on Twitter, but once again, I have to chastise you people who inexplicably made Sergey Pavlovich a favorite going into this matchup. That means you were betting on heavyweight MMA, which we know is not a good idea. Don't do that. But B, same thing I said in the last segment. There is no turnover in this division. But really, it was nice to see. This is the thing I really admire about Alistair Overeem. He's very moldable. Like he's willing, he is willing to change and transform. I think he's a very inward looking person. He recognizes when something isn't working, and he maybe doesn't always make the best decisions or react the best way, but he's very long term, very adaptable and has been. So this is like yet another late career sort of stylistic shift. I don't know if this is the approach he's going to take to all of his fights per se, but now we get to see Medium Reem fighting a lot more like Uber Reem, and it was kind of interesting to see. Yep.
I mean, it was not dissimilar to his fights against Mark Hunt and Stefan Struve.
No,
but yeah, I mean, I think he's clearly a smart fighter. He's just an incredibly experienced one, and just has a lot of depth to his game. And he's one of the most consistently entertaining heavyweights to watch for that reason. I mean, it combines with his inherent fragility to give you this kind of image. I mean, it's like watching someone speed running some awful, terrible ass game that's full of glitches where they can't get hit once. There's a kind of hypnotic skill to it.
My friends and I in college used to play a special mini game that we made up in EA MMA for the PS3 or whatever it was at the time, Xbox 360. I can't remember. Where you would play as you do Pride rules. You'd play as Bob Sapp, and the other person could be any other fighter they wanted. And the only requirement for winning as Bob Sapp was just not getting knocked out. because they really realistically captured how bad Bob Sapp is at facing punishment or actually having to fight anyone. And yeah, Overeem's like that, but actually good at fighting as well. It's great.
Yep. So yeah, it was cool to see. Like there was, and yeah, it was weird that Pavlovich was that much of a favorite because like all he really had was youth and durability, and Overeem just demonstrated that he's many things, and one of those things is that he's a really good MMA wrestler and a horrific fucking ground and pounder. When he did that thing where he just trapped Pavlovich's head by the cage and then made sounds like someone breaking a coconut open on it.
Yeah, absolutely terrifying. It was also, I like being reminded of Overeem's just clinch game in general. Like, I love how well his Thai clinch style sort of marries with the needs of an MMA clinch. Like he does a really, really good job of fighting with underhooks, but getting like these sort of, lat grips on his opponent, the sort of steering wheel move that Thai fighters do for their clinch dumps, and just sort of turning and rocking his opponent around, off balancing them and throwing knees. Like he does a great job of off balancing his opponent right into a knee strike. And then mixing that in with the takedowns. Like it's classic Muay Thai shit, but a very specialized MMA style of it. It's great. And yeah, Overeem's still Overeem, he's got to be declining in some sense. And, like it was the kind of fight where like at any moment he might have just got dinged on the chin and put down. But, it's heavyweight, so get used to it. Overeem's still here and he's not going anywhere. Not yet. All right. How about our beloved Yadong took on Vince Morales in a bantamweight matchup, and sort of in some ways similar to like Zabit Magomed Sharapov's fight with Kyle Bochniak, where Yadong did a fantastic job of like managing the fight. He gave all the problems to Morales that we kind of expected him to, largely based on speed and athleticism, but also like his defense and exchanges is really sharp. His shot selection makes so much sense. He did a really good job of sort of managing the fight until the third round. He started to get really, really tired. Morales knew he was down, received some really consistently excellent corner advice from his coaches, and came out and followed it to a T and started engaging more aggressively, putting his combinations together, and Song Yadong started exchanging with him very recklessly and looked like really bad for the last like 45 seconds. But up to that point, he looked like the blue chip prospect he's been made out to be.
I mean, but that's not a bad thing for a blue chip prospect to be or do, right?
No.
Just to control a fight for the whole. I mean, in some ways, it's the it's the more raw version of Holloway Lamas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He just controlled the whole fight, and then. I mean, with Holloway, it was different because, Holloway, the fight wasn't slipping away from him. He was just like, I'm going to do this because it's fun. Mm-hmm. But in this case, the fact that his response to kind of a fight suddenly slipping away from him, and, none of that was dumb or bad. Like, in the third round, he was like, this guy's still here. And Morales was obviously a level of just durable, dangerous athlete and fighter that he just never fought before. No matter how well prepared you are, if you've never fought someone who's just not going away, it's got to have that kind of effect on you. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, in the third round, he was like, right, I'm just going to take this guy down. He's not ready for it. And then Morales fought his way back to the feet, and you could just see Yadong was like, oh, shit.
That took a lot of energy. Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah, I mean, it was a good performance from I think both men. I think we saw, a lot of interesting, like, Morales showed that he's really tough. He's not going away. He can, and against a lesser athlete and a less skilled striker, I think he would have gotten a lot more done. And Song just showed that he's still got a very deep game. We thought he might struggle early. He didn't at all. And, the fact that he kind of faded late was completely understandable, and he still won every round. Mm-hmm. I mean, it ended up just being a stiff test for Yadong.
Yes, he did. And I do want to emphasize, just before we move on, like, Morales came out of this looking good too. You said that, but I just want to repeat it. Like, he had problems, but he was really, really composed for, like, surely the first time he's ever had to fight in a place like Beijing, against a really highly touted and notably, like, more athletic, style of fighter. And, he also, like, took corner advice very well. He's a really professional seeming sort of competitor. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him back as well. Song Yudong is definitely the shit though. So how about the Leech, my friend? Main card opener, Li Jingliang took on David Zawada, rather. And does he know how to have a different fight? The Leech.
I am unsure.
'Cause
is there anyone he cannot get fucked up by in the first round?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, the thing too is like, he's one of those fighters who, like, nothing that dramatic seems to change between the first round and the ones that come after. Like,
no.
He just sort of loosens up a little more. But in some ways, like, his defense gets worse. It's like, but almost just by relaxing and just fighting, rather than thinking through anything, it doesn't affect him the same way. He just gets caught cold. And then as the fight progresses, he gets caught slightly less, and it just doesn't seem to affect him anymore when it does. And the turnaround is that his shots start fucking people up really, really badly as the fight continues.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know. He just seems to brace him. He seems to just learn how hard the guy hits. Then he's like, you know what? I'm just going to throw either a right hand or a leg kick until you stop doing that. And eventually they do.
Yeah.
And then he just kind of batters them down. I mean, it's a superbly minimalist approach. And he does start moving his head, but yeah, it's difficult to say how he does it in any, he doesn't, like you said, he has weirdly long arms for his frame.
Yeah.
And so it just seems to be a timing thing.
Mm-hmm.
He just seems to be able to hit people, he gets better at hitting people before they've thrown, before they're at extension. And he doesn't particularly slip and counter on the way in. Yeah, he's a fascinatingly flawed fighter, and he's going to be he's never going to be more than a gatekeeper, but he's going to be an amazingly fun one. Or maybe they just keep putting him in action fights with someone who's going to hurt him in the first round and then get slowly worn down. I'm fine with that.
They'll probably do that, but I don't know. He seems to love it. So, I don't know. He does really seem to, unlike people like Lando Venata, like, he consistently flourishes in fights like this. Where, like, it's almost, it's improbable, to say the least, that you can rely on someone this much to lose the first round and then pick up both of the next two. But he does it most of the time. So, it's a fine line to walk, but just getting slightly better at timing your counters, getting slightly more aggressive, but also, I don't know, like, some of it too just has to do, I think, with, like, the mental pressure of fighting him. Like, he's kind of crazy. He just, like, starts marching you down and making weird wide-eyed faces at you and just throwing, like, 6 punches in a row. You just get less and less space to think and relax. You become more and more focused on what he's trying to do to you. And, man, he's a blast. I love the Leech. What else from this card, Phil?
2 more things. So, firstly, Zhang Weili against Jessica Aguilar. Holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps the most impressive performance on the card. I thought Aguilar's wrestling would be... Like, Aguilar's wrestling is still one of the kind of functional parts of her game, and she's been able to, like, take down big, strong athletes, if not tremendous defensive wrestlers like Courtney Casey. And I thought this would be something that she would have significant success with against Zhang Weili. Nope, she didn't have any success anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
She just got taken down in the clinch, got her skull elbowed in, and then looked like she might be getting some kind of position back, and then got instantly armbarred. Incredible performance. Zhang Weili, another awesome strawweight that we should all be thrilled about.
Yes, strawweight rules. Zhang Weili looks very athletic, very powerful, and, has one of those end up on your back, immediately start attacking submission games that I like. 60-second guard, that kind of thing. So, hell yeah. Not much to say about it. It was a relatively short fight. Aguilar just got shut out. And, you have to say, she's probably, or very definitely nearing the end of her career at this point.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think you kind of have to say that. But it was still just you rarely see the old fighter, someone with that pedigree. You still competing reasonably well, just get blown the fuck out.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Aguilar had people forget how competitive her fight with Claudia Gadelha was. Where she lost every round, but sort of like Morales against Song Yadong was definitely getting shots in every single round and was making adjustments and was working hard and accomplishing something. And here she just got...
And she's a grappler. She's
right.
Fought, Megumi Fuji, she hasn't been submitted since her debut.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impressive.
Really impressive performance. And the last one, of course, Kevin Holland. What is Kevin Holland? What is happening when he fights? It was not 30 seconds into this bout, Phil, that Holland was wildly bitch-slapping John Phillips with his back to the fence. These insane short-arm, open-handed counters. And yet, there's always something strangely impressive that he does in his fights as well. Something you're like, oh, he kind of has a feel for this. He kind of gets how this works. And then he starts bitch-slapping and giving long 20-second apologies for kicking his opponent in the balls. Stuff like that.
Or his amazing 52 block sequence up against the cage. Oh shit!
The defense that is equal parts impressive and good, and bad and dumb looking. It was.
Did you see when he was doing that? And then he tried to come out and convert one of his elbow blocks into kind of an overhand slashing elbow. Amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome. He was like, "This feels like an elbow position. Why not?" He's one of those fighters who's endlessly creative. Not rote at all. Very, very organic in some interesting ways. He's small for the division. Maybe speed has something to do with it, but he's a good athlete in that he seems to really surprise people with his ability to just pick random ideas out of the blue and apply them in the midst of what are always insane exchanges. Because he's not safe at all, he's a huge risk taker. But I don't know, he's absolutely thrilling to watch. He's most
amazing.
Perfectly.
When it comes time to vote for Bloody Elbow's Breakthrough Fighter of the Year, it's going to be one of those bars where it's going to be 99% Israel Adesanya. And I'm going to be there voting for Kevin Holland, goddammit.
Hell yeah. Kevin Holland added to the list of must-watch fighters for me. I hope you all will do the same. And if you didn't see the fight, maybe you can't appreciate it. Maybe it's too weird and esoteric a kind of thing to appreciate, but come on. You gotta love him. Just watch one of his fights. Or watch the one he lost to Thiago Santos. It was incredible too. There's something very charming about the way that he fights.
I mean, that's the thing. That John Phillips fight was primed to be stupid, dumb fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it was even stupider, dumber fun than we thought it was going to be going in.
Yep.
Kevin Holland consistently over-delivers.
Yep. All right, Kevin Holland, you're our new boy. We love you, buddy. And that's it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. We have all kinds of more big stuff coming down the pipe. For example, after JDS versus Tuivasa is... Oh.
Yep. Yeah.
Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega. Valentina Shevchenko versus Ioane and Jacek. Need I say more? So, the sort of doldrum part of the renewed UFC schedule will be behind us after next week, and we do have 2 cards this weekend. There are some things worth looking at, and again, I want to remind you, make sure you check out the Patreon. Not only earlier this week, or last week rather, I sat down with Mookie Alexander of Bloody Elbow and the Three Amigos podcast to talk about Alexander Usyk, who had a very impressive win over Tony Bellew and has effectively now cleared out the entirety of boxing's cruiserweight division in about a year. So that's awesome. He's probably going to be fighting heavyweights at some point in the near future, or at least that seems to be his plan. We discussed that and also did just a little bit of a preview of the upcoming Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence Jr. fight that's happening in March, but we wanted to talk about it a little bit in advance. So check that out. And then later this week, Phil and I are going to, almost certainly be putting up a bonus episode previewing a couple of the other fights from the undercards of the Ultimate Fighter 28 finale and the fight card in Adelaide. So that's it, basically. Look forward to those things. Find us on social media at Boxing Bush, BUSCH is my handle on the twitter.com. And you can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. And just before we wrap, Phil, what have you got? Oh, can you hear a cat yowling in the background?
I can. That cat clearly wants to find out what I have coming up. So I think mostly just previews. I'm very busy this week, but we're going to be doing, I think, RDA Usman and JDS Tuivasa. So keep a lookout for that. Last week I said we were going to do Blades and Ngannou, but we didn't. Instead, we ended up doing Chuck Tito 3, which was actually quite fun to preview. But
yes,
it was not fun to watch.
You have quite the tradition of you and David of doing just incredibly good previews of incredibly bad fights.
It's our forte.
Yeah. It's a good skill to have. Really worthwhile. You really think of all the other things you could apply that to. As for me, I'm still working on what I'm going to put out this week. I don't want to promise anything in particular yet, but I got a couple ideas, and I will be putting out something. So, I don't know. Look forward to that, if that's possible. And until next time, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.